All right, welcome back to the Homestand Show. Let's bring in Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets. Chris, it's officially official. Matthew Knies is now a Toronto Maple Leaf. He signed a 3-year entry-level deal with them. A lot of things needed to be done with the cap. Can you kind of explain how the Leafs made this happen?
Yeah, well, essentially at the trade deadline with the series of moves they made there, they did leave open one contract slot and roughly $925,000 in available space, which is what the cap hit ended up being on Matthew Knies' deal. Where it got more complicated is that Matt Murray got injured in that process. And because we're so close to the end of the regular season, there was no way for the Leafs to get any special sort of exemptions, put them on long-term injured reserve, for example. And so they ended up having to play without a second NHL goaltender on Saturday night. Kind of a nice moment getting Jet Alexander in for the last minute and 10 of the game they played. But that was all done as a way to sort of create what are called emergency conditions that allow them now to bring Joseph Woll up as an emergency fill-in and net. So they had to move some things around. The Leafs have one of the best capologists out there in Brandon Pridham, who's done really a marvelous job for 7 or 8 years. They're always right at the top in terms of at the ceiling, in terms of what they can spend, and yet they make acquisitions. They find ways to sign people. And in this case, they got their top young prospect under contract, and he's going to play some NHL games this week.
Yeah, talk about a roller coaster for Knies. He loses out in the Frozen Four in the final there. It's obviously destroyed him, just his boys, and then he signs a deal worth $925,000. I mean, not bad. When I left at that point Ryerson University, my first job, it didn't quite pay that. So my sympathy isn't quite what maybe some people have for him. That being said, I do wonder, CJ, where he fits in on this current Leafs team. Seems to me, health pending, there really isn't an open spot for him. I'm sure we'll see him this week and see what happens. But when game one starts, be it next Monday or next Tuesday, I can't imagine him being in that starting lineup. Can you?
Not really. I'm of the same mind as you. I think that, what's great for Matthew Knies, though, is he's probably their 13th forward on paper at this point in time. And the reason I say that's great is, having watched a lot of Stanley Cup playoffs over the years, no team barely gets through 2 or 3 games without some kind of injury situation, let alone, potentially playing for 2 months. And so I think if the Leafs have a run in the playoffs, I think that there will be a role for him to play in terms of getting into some game action. But, at this point in time, this is really a signing with the future in mind. From the Leafs end of this bargain, they want Matthew Knies to be a regular member of the team next season and the year after that. Anything that happens now, I think, is almost kind of a bonus from him. And, it's going to be cool to see him get into some of these games at the end of the regular season that don't really carry any specific consequences for the Leafs. And then, the playoffs, I think, is just a giant TBD. It depends how it goes, depends who's healthy, depends maybe on the performance of some of the players, specifically in the bottom 6 of the lineup. I mean, you might see Knies come in at some point if Sheldon Keefe thinks his team needs a spark, just with this kind of excitement, maybe putting this young guy in the lineup. I mean, we've seen him do all those sorts of things in the past. At least played Nick Robertson. He went straight from the OHL's Peterborough Petes into the COVID shutdown. And in, the 2020 playoffs, he was in the Leafs lineup against Columbus. So, this sort of thing has happened in the past, but I'm with you. I don't see a regular role for him at this point in time. And really, I think they'll just take it game by game and see how he performs.
With that said, CJ, do you think it's a bad decision by the Leafs to burn 1 year of his ELC if he's just going to play a few games and probably not make the playoff lineup?
I don't think so. There's different schools of thought on this, I would say, but he burns the first year off the contract, sure, but he also doesn't get all the rights down the road. For example, when he plays the next 2 years, he actually isn't eligible to sign an offer sheet 2 summers from now. So he loses that little bit of leverage down the road. And so there's kind of trade-offs with all these decisions. And let's not forget, Matthew Knies, as with any NCAA player, especially those that are highly ranked prospects, he's got leverage. He could have just chosen to finish his collegiate career at the University of Minnesota and actually been a free agent in 2 years' time. So, I think you have to have a little incentive from the team end to prompt the player to be willing to leave university early. And so that's kind of where I see the trade-off being. But for a team like the Leafs, the nice part is they do have him cost controlled for the next 2 years because of the rules of the entry-level system. He didn't get any performance bonuses, which is really important for their cap picture. It gives them certainty there because, we've seen some teams when they have to pay those bonuses, they end up going over the cap. And then that limits how much, takes away some money they can spend the following season. So, I think that this is a kind of a fair deal on both ends of it. And, Matthew Knies will like getting his next contract sooner. But, he doesn't have the full rights of a normal player who reaches that stage.
Now, Leafs finish up their season against the Panthers, Lightning, and Rangers. We've had this debate over the last couple of weeks on these games are kind of meaningless now. If you are in head coach Sheldon Keefe's position, how do you navigate through these next 3 games, knowing coming next week, the real games kick off?
Yeah, the only thing that matters about these games is getting through them healthy, right? And so, obviously, I think there's a conversation that goes on with the Leafs top players and the organizational staff about how many games that they might want to play, because, you want to keep your players fresh too and feeling like they're on top of things, because if the Leafs don't open the playoffs till next Tuesday, which is what I've heard it will be, I mean, that's a longer break than you get in the season. Normally you're going to have, 5 days between games, even if you play them all. And so I think that you're sort of balancing those situations with each individual. There's only so much they can do in terms of calling players up because of their cap position. So, it's kind of a line to walk, but I'm guessing we're going to see 3 lineups in these games that aren't like the lineups that will start against the Lightning or we'll probably ever see again. I mean, it's going to be a mixture of, getting minutes for players who don't get it. We've already seen the Leafs rest, a number of guys for recent games, Mitch Marner, Morgan Riley, Mark Giordano, TJ Brody. They've all sat at least a game in the last week or two. And I think you're going to see more of that here in the stretch drive to the playoffs.
We're speaking with Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets. Obviously a big game for the Panthers tonight against the Leafs. Let's talk about the game against Tampa Bay. I'm just curious on your thoughts on this. Do you believe that'll be a game where we'll just see a lot of rested players, or will there be maybe either side sending some sort of message ahead of the playoffs?
I don't think there'll be much message sending. I mean, maybe within the game, someone like Pat Maroon might want to make his physical force felt a little bit, throw a legal check. The Leafs players are known for the same, kind of play. That might be the sort of messages, just, get ready for this. You're going to be seeing a lot of me over the next 2 weeks, but, from a coaching standpoint, I don't think that there's much to be proven. The Leafs haven't, as we're recording this, revealed their goalie plan, but I wouldn't even think about putting Ilya Samsonov, for example, in that game. I just think why open the possibility it doesn't go well, and will that be in his mind and all those things. I think that you send out the kind of lineup that just gets you through the night, and we'll see where they're at a week from now. It's kind of an interesting time, right? Because the Lightning have struggled of late. They just completed a 3-game road trip where they allowed 19 goals against. John Cooper, their coach, called it an embarrassment a couple times in various interviews he did with reporters. And, they're dealing with injury situations as well. So the Lightning aren't, on at least, it doesn't look like they're lined up the way you would want to be if you could sculpt how your team went into the playoffs. So it'll be an interesting game Tuesday between Toronto and Tampa, just because, we all know that the real ones are going to start soon enough, and both teams kind of come in different ways. The Leafs, I think, are flying high. There'll be some excitement with Knies and company, and the Lightning are kind of looking to find their best selves with not much time left to do it.
Yeah, you might just see Simmons in that one, I think, just in case. Get the guys.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case, right? Nice option to have there. Okay, I know we'll talk about Tampa, next, couple of weeks. Let's look way in the future here, shall we? We're Leaf fans in this desk here, right? Well, 2 of us are. Well, one's not so much. But, okay, Mitch Marner is a guy that, for me, is really emerging as maybe the most important member of this team, in that he plays in all situations. He's a ton of PK minutes. We know what he's doing in the standings. He might get 100 points this season. Is there a world where Marner gets a bigger deal than Matthews, or is that just ridiculous?
Oh, I don't think so, but he'll never be far away. I mean, he's not far away now when you look at when you compare their cap hits. They're in the same solar system, but look, they're both kind of unicorns in their own way. I mean, Mitch Marner, the way he sees the game, the fact that he does kill penalties in the manner that he does it, there's not a lot of players that sort of, if you stack up his best attributes, that would match him in any individual category. I mean, you might find someone who passes the puck as well as him, but maybe doesn't play as well defensively. And I'd say in Austin's case, he's a centerman who scores goals, and that's just not typically what you see. I mean, not at the rate that he scores them. And so I think goal scoring is the hardest thing to do in the game. It tends to be what gets players rewarded the most. We've seen David Pastrnak, for example, just sign a new contract at a number I think a lot of people didn't think he'd get, above an $11 million a year cap hit. But, he's got 60 goals this year. There's That's something only a handful of players have done in the last 15 years in the NHL. And so, it's, I guess the question that I'd throw back at you is, in this very hypothetical situation, are both players signing with the Leafs?
Right.
I don't think that Marner would come in above Matthews in that circumstance. But if one or both of them are on the open market, I mean, you're worth what someone's willing to pay you, right? So it's harder for me to gauge how it would fall if it's in multiple teams bidding for them. But within the Leafs hierarchy, maybe they end up with matching cap hits. That's probably, if we want to imagine a scenario with a long-term in Toronto, I would see both of them maybe playing at the same number on their next deals.
I apologize for that question, by the way, CJ. It's impossible to answer.
Yeah, it really is. You're a Leaf fan's anxiety too.
I liked it because I don't have a canned answer. I have not given that much thought. So you saw me work through my thought process live there in that answer.
Now let's leave the hypothetical world. I want to ask you: the Tampa Bay Lightning have been, one of the last couple of years, a dominant power in the NHL. This year's edition of the Tampa Bay Lightning, are they on the same level as those previous teams, or is there a glaring weakness that puts them a rung below the teams that we've seen from years previous?
Hypothetically speaking.
Yeah.
Well, they don't look to be the same challenge, but I say that with a giant caveat. I mean, we've just seen they have so many difference makers at each position, and these guys have done it so often. Like I feel like at your peril, would you question sort of the heart or the spirit of that team? They have Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov among their forwards, and others that are impactful as well. You have Victor Hedman, the horse on your blue line. You have Andrei Vasilevsky, unquestionably one of the best, and maybe for some, the best goaltender in the NHL. And so when you have so many of those elements taken care of, plus depth in other spots, you're always a dangerous opponent. But, they have not had recent form. If you look over the last, say month and a half, I believe they had 2 5-game losing streaks. As I just mentioned, they're coming off a really poor 3-game road trip. They do have, injury questions. Tanner Jeannot, who was their big trade deadline acquisition, was seen hobbling off the ice last week. Anthony Cirelli's missed games. He's a really important matchup player for them when you get into a playoff series. So they don't look to be the same challenge today, but they've been in 3 States Stanley Cup finals, and they played last year's without Braden Point. He was injured at the end of the playoffs. And keep in mind, Braden Point right now is chasing 50 goals. So we're talking about a pretty important, contributor for them. And they still took Colorado to 6 games. I mean, I think there's an alternate universe where he's healthy, and you just wonder if that would have been enough for them to maybe win a 3rd straight cup. So it's a bit of a loaded question. Definitely the regular season version of this year's Lightning doesn't look as dangerous as the last 3 playoff teams, but I still think they're going to be a difficult out for whoever comes up against them. If they get past Toronto, whoever's next is not going to be like, oh, this will be an easy best of 7.
Yeah, you can't write them off, especially with the Leafs' recent history in the playoffs, at least in first rounds. Chris Johnston of NorthStar Bets. Thanks again. Let's do this soon.
Yep, we'll talk soon, guys. The playoffs are around the corner.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, the Leafs, interesting heading into the first round of the playoffs. We hope that they can get through. At least Leaf fans hope they can get through, but you just never know.
And it's still question marks, right? I mean, we're seeing Eric Gustafsson playing in the first power play at the moment, right? We're seeing Riley in the second power play, and O'Reilly in the first power. There's still lots of intangibles. We're not sure what the end result will be. So
Chris Weidman said they get what they deserve in a couple of weeks.
I know.